Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to mark the 40th anniversary of John Lennon's death, which comes up tomorrow. I'm reminded of that Supertramp song, From Now On, Monday has come around again, because this time of year, and it was a Monday in which it happened, although Tuesday morning in the UK, this time of year is always quite depressing for that reason, ever since 1980. So I just want to start off by, I've got a few things to show you. Start off by just remembering where I was. I think a lot of us can remember, those of us old enough, can remember exactly where we were. I'm 56 years old now, and I was 16 at the time. I was at boarding school, and I remember I got woken up on the Tuesday morning by James Stewart and Joe Ellis, and I think one other person. I think three people were trying to wake me to tell me the bad news. I seem to remember I had a religious studies exam that day, which I did very poorly in. I spent the whole exam just drawing a tombstone with JL RIP, and then sat around for the rest of the day listening to Radio 1 play songs, and Andy Peebles briefly playing excerpts of the interview he'd just done on December the 6th at the Hit Factory in New York, a very lengthy interview. There was also a lengthy interview given just a few months before he died, which came out a couple of days before he died for Playboy, and this is the book of the entire interview, David Sheff. That's another superb interview. The Andy Peebles one was released on CD in 1990 and also in book form. Newsweek did an interview, and also RKO from San Francisco with Dave Sholin did the final interview. Often it's said that the Andy Peebles was the last interview, but it wasn't. The RKO Dave Sholin interview was the last, believe it or not, conducted on the afternoon of December the 8th, the day it all happened. And when they came out of the Dakota to pack their stuff into the car, the killer came up to them and say, "Have you just interviewed Lennon?" And they said, "As a matter of fact, we have." I did have the book to show you, The Making of Double Fantasy by Ken Sharp, which is a superb book because it's got recollections of Dave Sholin, Andy Peebles, and all the musicians on Double Fantasy, Jack Douglas. By the way, I just want to say, I was listening to some of Double Fantasy today, and the production is just superlative. Jack Douglas and John and Yoko did a superb job. It is pretty much without question the best sounding Lennon record. It's not overproduced. Maybe on Starting Over it's a little bit overproduced, but in general it's very tastefully produced and crystal clear instrumentation, the sound, and I think it's a masterpiece. And here's the book, sorry. Highly recommended. Always crediting, but basically the whole book is quotes from people who were there during the making of Double Fantasy, from engineers to musicians to Yoko as well is quoted in there. Another book I want to recommend is this. All of these books are quite painful because they remind you of the time of the summer and the months before leading up to John dying. But the summer of 1980 is a superb collection of photos, including this one by Paul Garish. And I think that would have been a better front cover of Double Fantasy. I've never really been a fan of the front cover of Double Fantasy. I agree with you there, Invisible Ray. I think this would have been, the colour version of that would have been a great cover. And this book is full of other pictures from 1980, some of which are familiar, some of which aren't. Whilst we're on the subject of Paul Garish, he's the amateur photographer who befriended Lennon. He was basically a fan, and he hung around the Dakota on and off from February 79 up to the day John died. And eventually he got pretty friendly with John, and John would allow him to go on walks with him to the coffee shop or to the local shop to buy wherever he was going to buy something. And Paul was there. And by the way, if you want to see interviews, if you just type in Paul Garish Lennon, there's a 1990 documentary, and he's also featured in the YouTube documentary The Day John Lennon Died, which is over 3 parts on YouTube. It's pretty interesting that he was there on December the 8th, and he stood outside the Dakota waiting for John for several hours, and Mark Chapman was also there. They had a brief exchange, asked each other where they were from, and then Paul said, "Where are you staying?" And Chapman said, "Why do you want to know?" And Paul said, "Well, I don't want to speak to you. Go back to where you were the one who initiated the conversation. Go back to where you were standing." And then someone was speculating that maybe Paul Garish could have spotted the fact that Chapman was dangerous. But I think certainly before Lennon died, one would have never have thought of asking someone hanging around to meet a famous person, "Have you got a gun in your pocket?" I mean, it wouldn't be the thing that comes to mind. But I remember 12 years after John died, I was hanging around outside MPL, Paul's office in Soho Square, waiting for Paul to come out because I saw his car was there. And John Hamill came out of the office and came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" So he must have spotted me from the window. And I said, "I'm waiting for Paul. He's not here. It's only Linda." And I said, "Well, can I wait for Linda?" And he said, "Okay." And he must have sussed me out and thought I was not a threat. But it's interesting that he came up to me. But at the time, before this all happened, I mean, one would, and then the same person on the internet was saying that the taxi driver who drove past the Dakota an hour before the shooting noticed that Chapman was looking dodgy, and that's ridiculous for him to have alerted the police based on just a look like that. And James Taylor was accosted by the killer in the subway at West 72nd Street. But again, he didn't give any firm indication that he was going to kill John. He just was acting a little bit crazy. And I think it's a bit much for someone to expect James Taylor to have reported that to the police. So anyway, and then all these people since he died saying what might have happened and gleefully predicting the fact that John and Yoko would split and the Beatles would get back together and stuff. Well, we don't know, but we only can go on what John said. And in the last months of his life, he was pretty anti the idea of a Beatles reunion. And I think that's about the best thing we can rely on, because he's not here to tell us otherwise. And as to whether John and Yoko would have stayed together, well, again, at the time of his death, they were just starting over, to quote the song, and renewing their vows in a way. And by all accounts, by all the people who encountered them in this book and in others, said that they seemed very happy together. So, but they were also honest about their relationship. They said it was up and down, and they didn't portray themselves as some perfect couple. Lennon always accepted and admitted he was a flawed human being, and that his relationship with Yoko was not perfect. And people remember Double Fantasy for the lovey-dovey front cover and for the singles Starting Over and Woman, which were admittedly quite sentimental. But also on the same album, tracks like I'm Losing You and I'm Moving On, Give Me Something, which are pretty much the negative side of a relationship, all the frustrations. So all these people who say John and Yoko were trying to portray and Elliot Mintz trying to portray themselves as the perfect honeymoon couple, I think that's off the mark. I don't think they were. I think they were always honest. Was also listening to some tracks from Double Fantasy this morning. Grow Old Along With Me particularly got me particularly emotional, because it's basically a standard for me. It would have been a Lennon classic had he lived, and it's pretty decent as it is with the piano intro. I'm listening to the version from Give Me Some Truth, with the first, which is a combination of two versions. The first one, just the solo piano, and then the rest of the song with George Martin's orchestration. I was also hearing some extra bass on Watching the Wheels, which I hadn't heard before, which was quite interesting. So I want to just show you some of the stuff I have from the time. So I have the Daily Mail front page, the Killer autograph, Lennon signing the Double Fantasy album for his Killer 6 hours before he died, and the Telegraph, Lennon was stalked for 3 days. And then we've got from this book, Rock and Roll Headlines, the Daily Mirror, and The NME, which is a British music paper. And then a few days after Lennon died, this Sunday Times tribute came out, which obviously it was a very sad time, but I was happy to get this and treasured reading it. Didn't obviously bring John back, but it one just wanted to wallow in his music for those few weeks of 1980 before Christmas, and all his songs got to #1 over that period. And here's the colour version of the Paul Garish picture, and it's full of good stuff, this magazine. So yeah, a sad anniversary. Can't really believe it's 40 years. By the way, the Grow Old orchestrated version is on this Lennon anthology, which is a brilliant compilation because it's all unreleased stuff. So yeah, a sad anniversary, but we have his music. It lives on. Don't want to be cliched about it. Before I go, I just want to give a shout out to a podcast, a McCartney podcast called Paul or Nothing, which is run by Sam Wiles, worth checking out. Considering this guy is a second generation Beatles fan, McCartney fan, his knowledge is absolutely stunning, and very amusing podcasts he does quite often in conjunction with a guest, and I'm due to be a guest on his program shortly, so that should be fun. So yeah, John Lennon, rest in peace. Thanks for everything, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.